Random House Audio presents The Idealist, Jeffrey Sachs and the Quest to End Poverty, by Nina Munk. Read for you by Susan Nezami. This book is dedicated to the memory of Linda Munk, 1937 to 2013. As she often said, quoting Henry James, "Live all you can. It's a mistake not to." Introduction. Jeffrey Sachs pointed to the cup of Starbucks coffee in my hand. Before I had a chance to introduce myself, he said, "You know, I've done a formal breakdown of what it would cost to fully fund the global prevention of malaria, and it's $2.50 a year for every American. $2.50. That's a single cup of Starbucks coffee." It was September 2006. A year earlier, Sacks's book, The End of Poverty, had been excerpted on the cover of Time magazine. It also made the New York Times bestseller list. By the time I met Sachs, The End of Poverty had been translated into 18 languages. I'd come across his name while reporting for Vanity Fair on Bono's involvement in Africa. Time and again, I'd hear references to Bono's guru. "My name is Bono, and I am the rock star student," to quote Bono's foreword to The End of Poverty. "The man with me is Jeffrey D. Sachs, the great economist, and for a few years now, my professor." Sachs, born in 1954, was 51 years old when I first met him. The Catley Professor of Sustainable Development at Columbia University and special advisor to the Secretary General of the United Nations. During the 1980s and 1990s, he was nicknamed Dr. Shock, the brilliant, controversial macroeconomist from Harvard who'd prescribed radical fiscal and monetary discipline, so-called shock therapy, to countries emerging from communism. He'd also had a distinguished academic career, but with the publication of The End of Poverty, he had become a celebrity. More than 200,000 copies were sold in the United States, an extraordinary feat for a book that can be truthfully a slog, with a few charts and graphs for company. He'd also starred in MTV's documentary, The Diary of Angelina Jolie and Dr. Jeffrey Sachs in Africa. In the movie, Jolie calls him one of the smartest people in the world. Sachs is very smart. He's one of those people who can and does go on about, say, the shortcomings of covariance matrices, the etymology of Nilo-Saharan languages, the difference between two species of mosquito, Anopheles gambia and Aedes aegypti, and the effect of the adiabatic process on temperatures in the highlands of Kenya. He has an insatiable, unselfconscious fascination with the world in all its complexity. Once, when we were driving past the equator in Uganda, Sachs asked us to stop the car so he could phone his son Adam, at that time a Harvard undergraduate majoring in earth and planetary science. The purpose of the call? To discuss whether the Coriolis effect influences the direction that water swirls down a drain. It doesn't, apparently. What struck me after I'd spent some time with Sachs was his genius for reducing huge and complex issues to their essence. Above all, it's his ability to synthesize, to turn ideas into bullet points that has allowed him to move the issue of global poverty into the mainstream. He has convinced the developed world to consider his utopian thesis, that with enough focus, enough determination, and enough money, we can end the suffering of those still trapped by poverty. In fact, from Sacks's point of view, the problem can be solved by 2025, and it can be solved easily. In his mind, the most stubborn problem becomes as easy to grasp as a $2.50 cup of Starbucks coffee. With the right approach, anything is possible. He's sure of that. malaria can be prevented with the widespread use of insecticide-treated mosquito nets. The problem of hunger can be solved with subsidized fertilizers and high-yield seeds. Universal education can be achieved by eliminating primary school fees. We have enough on the planet to make sure easily that people aren't dying of their poverty, he assured me. That's the basic truth. In his speeches, Sachs presents his audience with an ethical choice that is, no choice. Either you decide to leave people to die, or you decide to do something about it. Who can resist Sachs's call to action? After all, 2 billion people on the planet are scraping by barely on less than $1 or $2 a day. Industrialization has passed them by. They have not been lifted out of poverty by what proponents of free markets like to call the rising tide, the tide that lifts some boats, but not all of them. Trapped by disease, hunger, physical isolation, dysfunctional governments, environmental degradation, and, as Sachs argues, poverty itself, their life expectancy hovers around 50. In most of sub-Saharan Africa, per capita income is so low, it looks like a misprint. In Malawi, for example, per capita income, adjusted for purchasing power, is $870 a year. In Tanzania, $1,510 a year. The countries at the bottom coexist with the 21st century, but their reality is the 14th century. Civil war, plague, ignorance, to quote the economist Paul Collier in The Bottom Billion. The bare truth is, for all the hundreds of billions of dollars spent on foreign aid in the past decades, no one has come close to ending poverty in Africa. Development experts keep publishing books and articles promoting one theory after another, but so far there's been no workable solution. If Jeffrey Sachs, one of the greatest macroeconomists of his generation, believed he had the answer to poverty, I was eager to hear him out. But the more time I spent with Sachs, the more questions I had. Are we really at a defining moment in history, as he imagines? Can extreme poverty, one of the great unsolved problems of our time, a condition as old as human society itself, be eradicated? In remote African villages where there are no roads or power or running water, and where most people are illiterate, how does sustainable economic development take hold? Can people be lifted out of poverty, as Sachs puts it, or do they have to lift themselves? To embrace his view of the world requires courage and conviction. Call it idealism, if you'd like, or faith. Have you seen children dying? Sachs challenged his audience using rhetorical shock therapy. I'd followed him to Montreal to attend an all-day conference on poverty. He was wearing a blue Oxford cloth shirt and khakis. His head seemed too large for his slight frame, and characteristically, he was badly shaven. His deep Midwestern voice was resonant, compelling. He spoke for almost an hour without notes. Projected onto a giant screen just above his head was a photograph he'd taken a few months earlier in Malawi at Zomba Central Hospital. Covered by thin sarongs, small children in malaria comas were lying on the bare floor. Row after row, their yellow eyes rolled back. I never thought, in the 21st century, growing up in the 20th century, I'd ever see that, Sachs exclaimed, outraged by the short-sightedness implicit in the photograph. Lack of a bed net, lack of $1 medicine, lack of an oral rehydration solution in time to save a child dehydrated from a diarrheal infection, lack of antibiotics to cure a child of acute lower respiratory infection, contracted from living in a hut where dung is burned to cook the meals in a smoke-filled chamber. He went on. Lack of a 5-cent immunization so that you have hundreds of thousands of children dying of vaccine-preventable diseases.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?